They tried to save him from the bottle, but no one could save him from the silence that followed the cheers. George Best was more than a footballer. He was a phenomenon, a boy from Belfast who rose from the war-torn streets to become the face of a new generation. When Manchester United discovered him at just 15, they didn't just find a player, they found a comet. And like most comets, he burned too brightly to last. From the very beginning, there was something otherworldly about George. He wasn't built like a footballer. He looked like a pop star. Small, lean, almost fragile, but with a kind of balance and grace that defied logic. On the field, he moved differently. He glided past defenders as if gravity didn't apply to him. He didn't just play football, and he painted it. Every touch, every feint, every goal had an artist's signature. By the age of 19, George Best was already a star. By 22, he was a legend. In 1968, he helped Manchester United win the European Cup, becoming the first English team to do it, and was crowned the European Footballer of the Year. The world was his stage, and every camera loved him. The Beatles had revolutionized music. George Best did the same for football. He became the symbol of youth, freedom, and rebellion. Long hair, sharp suits, fast cars, beautiful women. He wasn't just playing the game. He was the game. Maradona good, Pele better. George Best, the saying went. He was the original rock star footballer, living life without breaks. But behind the charm and the fame, there was a different George. A quiet boy who had once written a letter home to his mother, saying how lonely he felt in Manchester. A boy who struggled to handle what came with greatness. The adoration, the attention, the constant need to perform. For every goal he scored, there was another headline. For every night he spent on the pitch, there were two he spent in the clubs. People around him saw the signs early. Sir Matt Busby, his father figure, tried to guide him. Teammates tried to pull him back. Women tried to love him enough to change him. But George was chasing something no one else could see. He didn't drink because of fame. He drank because the silence was louder than the applause. In the 1960s, the world worshipped its heroes but never protected them. There was no social media, no mental health awareness, no one asking why someone like George would spiral. He was supposed to be grateful. He was supposed to smile for the cameras and keep scoring goals. But fame is a strange thing. It gives you everything except peace. By 26, George Best had walked away from Manchester United. The club that made him a legend couldn't hold on to him anymore. His discipline was gone, his body was exhausted, and his spirit was fractured. He went from stadiums filled with 70,000 people to smaller clubs, forgotten leagues, and fading headlines. The papers turned on him. The same ones that once called him El Beatle now called him a waste of talent. Every photo of him holding a drink became another punchline. They didn't see the man. They saw the myth unraveling. He played for over a dozen clubs after leaving United, chasing something he'd never find again. The boy who once made defenders dizzy was now struggling to stay sober, struggling to stay relevant. Yet even in decline, he had moments of brilliance, flashes of the old George that reminded everyone why he was different. But the truth is, George Best wasn't destroyed by alcohol. He was destroyed by emptiness, by the unbearable stillness of life after applause. He once said, "I spent a lot of money on booze, birds, and fast cars. The rest I just squandered." It sounded funny, even charming, but behind the humor was pain. A man laughing at his own destruction because it hurt too much to face it sober. His relationships crumbled. His health deteriorated. The club stopped calling. The fans who once screamed his name now read about his arrests, his divorces, his liver transplants. Everyone tried to save him, doctors, friends, lovers, but they were trying to fix something that fame had already broken. The thing about George Best was that he didn't want pity. He didn't want forgiveness. He just wanted to feel alive again. And for him, that feeling only existed on the pitch. The roar of the crowd, the ball at his feet, the rush of adrenaline, that was his real addiction. The alcohol was just a poor substitute for that high. As he aged, the world around him moved on. New stars rose. New headlines filled the back pages. But whenever he appeared, thin, frail, yet still with that glint in his eye, there was always a hush, because people knew they were looking at something that would never come again, a kind of magic that couldn't be coached or manufactured. In his later years, he became almost philosophical about his own downfall. He didn't blame anyone. He didn't even blame himself. In one of his last interviews, he said softly, "I was born with a great gift, and sometimes the price of having a great gift is great pain." That's the tragedy of George Best. He wasn't evil. He wasn't selfish. He was human, too human for the myth he became. The world built him up as a god, and then watched fascinated as he fell. Because deep down, people love their heroes more when they break. When he passed away in 2005, thousands lined the streets of Belfast. His coffin was draped in the flag of Northern Ireland. Fans wept openly, not just for the man, but for the reminder of what he represented, the beauty and fragility of genius. Even in death, George Best brought people together. They called him the fifth Beatle, the first celebrity footballer. But maybe the truest title was this: the genius who couldn't be saved. Not because he didn't deserve saving, but because the world never really tried to understand what he was running from. They saw the parties, the women, the fast cars. They didn't see the loneliness behind the smile. The man sitting in an empty hotel room after the roar of Old Trafford had faded. The man who could dribble past 5 defenders, but couldn't escape his own shadow. They tried to save him from the bottle, the saying goes. But no one could save him from the silence that followed the cheers. That's the sound that haunted George Best, the sound of nothing. The sound of a man who had everything, except the one thing he truly needed: peace. Even now, decades later, his story feels like a warning and a love letter all at once. A warning about fame's cruel hunger, and a love letter to the kind of beauty only flawed men can create. Because for all his mistakes, for all his self-destruction, George Best gave us something pure, something timeless. When you watch his old clips, the muddy pitches, the heavy ball, the defenders falling at his feet, you don't just see football. You see art. You see the spark of a man who wanted to be free, even if that freedom cost him everything. And maybe in some way George Best wouldn't have wanted it any other way. To live ordinary would have been worse than dying extraordinary. He once said, "If I had to do it all again, I'd change nothing." Maybe he meant it. Maybe he didn't. But what's certain is that the world will never forget the boy from Belfast who made football look like poetry, and whose own life became its most tragic verse. Because George Best didn't die a failure. He died as something rarer, a legend with a heartbeat. A reminder that genius isn't meant to last forever. It's meant to shine, burn and fade, leaving behind stories that echo long after the cheers have stopped.